Welcome to the monthly Northern California Recycling Association Zero Waste Advocacy Committee's show, or ZWAC as we call it. And I'm thinking in the future, we're going to turn ZWAC from a noun to a verb, so that if you're doing something inconsistent with zero waste principles, you're going to get ZWAC'd. Anyway, that's what I'm aiming. So on tonight's show, we're going to do two, I feel like Ed Sullivan, we're going to have a really good show tonight, which is going to feature two things. We're going to have a segment from the recycling archives. And last month, it was very poignant about the need for the recycling archives, because we featured a speaker last month who had passed away after he'd spoken here months earlier. So there's a big body of knowledge that the pioneering recyclers have that we don't want to lose. And tonight, you know, our featured guy is Rick Anthony. And I'm going to tell a story about him in the archives.
The farm doesn't serve food after 5 p.m.
But, and I'm struggling with my screen here for a second.
People are joining.
So anyway, so tonight we're going to have Susan Kinsella do a reading from Rick's interview for the archives. And after that, starting at 6 o'clock, we're going to talk about something I think is incredibly cool, which is fungi or mushrooms, or however you want to try to pronounce it. And just to give a tease about that, 65 million years ago, an asteroid hurtles through space, hits the Earth, and destroys virtually all life as we know it. So what did it leave? What did the asteroid leave behind? It left behind the surface of the planet is filled with rotting carbon. The sky is filled with smoke and debris and pollutants. And yet, 65 million years later, up until the start of the Industrial Revolution, it was a pretty clean slate with a lot of greenery. And what caused that was fungi. Fungi decomposed the rotting carbon, took the pollutants out of the air, and gave the planet a way to produce the greenery that we've enjoyed for a long time. So the planet's kind of bad shape right now. We've got viruses, we've got climate change, we've got plastic pollution, and we want to know if fungi can do anything about that, because in 2008 there was a TED talk from Paul Stamets, which we'll see, and he talks about mushrooms are going to cure viruses, they're going to take carbon out of the air, and they're going to clean up the ocean plastic. So I asked Joanne Rodriguez to come tonight because she's got a mycoremediation business in Illinois, and we're going to ask her, in 13 years, has all that come to pass? But first, we're going to talk about Rick Anthony, because I could take 20 minutes telling his biography. Founder of this, board member of that. One of the people posted to his LinkedIn website that there's nobody in the world that knows more about zero waste and is a better speaker about that. So I'm glad he's able to join us tonight to answer questions. But first, we're going to turn it over to Susan Kinsella, who's the coordinator of the Recycling Archives. And she's going to read, because she's a gifted reader, you know, a curated portion of Rick's interview for the archives. So Susan, take it away.
Cool, thank you. Let me pull this up. Okay, so Rick Anthony has been so involved deep in the guts of recycling that it's hard to figure out which of his stories are the best ones to tell you. But I'm going to begin with a story about how he got started in recycling in college at Long Beach State in Southern California. So Rick says, I was primarily an organizer from elementary school on. I mostly organized talent show skits. My parents were union organizers in the 1930s. I heard union organizing rhetoric every day at home from an early age, and a group of us students tried to talk about civil rights. I organized for the Red Cross. I was working with people at halfway houses, and then I went to college and watched the war, watched people getting drafted. Of course, I knew I was going to get drafted too. I thought the Vietnam War was a mistake. I became an anti-war activist, and I got into the experimental college at California State University, Long Beach. I was doing creative writing about lots of different things. At the first Earth Day, I had to run a workshop, so we did a theme on the environment. I wrote a poem whose first line was, "Black sun over sewers becoming surf, And I'm thinking I would love to see the rest of that poem. But he goes on, all I really knew was that I was against the war and I was against racism. The environmental movement was just getting going and I was drawn to it as a big idea. After my wife and I got married in college and she got pregnant, I needed a job, realizing that I couldn't be a hippie anymore. So I went to the student body president at CSU Long Beach and said, can I have a job? And he said, you hippies are always too late, but I've got one job left that you might be able to do. I have this recycling center that was started on Earth Day. The organizers are gone and the volunteers aren't working anymore, but people keep bringing materials in and the administration is on my back. So either you clean it up and make it work, or you figure out a way to shut it down. Either way, I'll pay you $1 an hour, but you don't get to be the manager. A student named Shin Hori is the manager. You're the assistant manager. There's 2 of you and you 2 can run it together. Well, I had not a clue what I should do or what that meant. So Shin and I went down to the recycling center and we sat there watching for about an hour and a half. And what we saw was faculty wives coming in Cadillacs and students coming in old vans painted all over with flowers and such. They were there putting paper in paper bins and aluminum bins. And being a writer and a poet and a political scientist, I asked the question, why? Shin, however, was a business major. His dad was a gardener. My dad was a mechanic. We were both working class kids. And Shin asked the business question, what's it worth? It turned out that there was a paper strike going on in Canada. So prices were up to $100 a ton. We sold our first full paper bin for about $1,000. And Shin said, get more bins. And I said, what's this all about? That was my first experience of recycling. I actually got a job that brought in more money than I was paid. I went down to the recycling center with my manager and we observed the job together, saw it happening, and then we figured out what it was worth. And from then on, it was a business idea. So Rick is asked by David Tam, who's the person who interviewed him, and this was back in 2007, did you think of recycling as a social movement at the time that you became aware of it? And Rick answers, yeah, I had to think that way right from the start. Because when I went to work at the recycling center, my anti-war friends accused me of working for industry. They said that what I was doing was working for the imperialists. But as we started to think about the meaning of what we were doing, we realized that the more recycling we did, the less imperialism we'd have. I mean, we didn't have to have a war in Vietnam if we could recycle all our tin cans, because we were going into Vietnam partly to get their tin and their tungsten. Also, I was a political scientist in my studies and in my mind. I saw a huge social movement coming to life right in front of me. It was about people from Republican to Democrat to radical to conservative to hippie. Even the richest people saw this material as their possessions that were valuable. They were upset that they had to put this stuff in the garbage. They wanted to put the newspaper in the paper bin themselves. A lot of people would come in their Cadillacs and leave me bags of mixed stuff. And when I'd come out to protest, they'd say, but I'm giving you all this valuable material. So after college, Rick went to work for SCS Engineers. He tells about one of the most important things he learned there. Dan Knapp really turned me on to the market categories. I always did the marketing for SCS Engineers. I was the one to go into the landfill to do the sorts. Dan was a PhD sociologist when he was hired to go salvage stuff at the Berkeley landfill. What he did there went beyond anything that we were using. Dan did sociology out there while he scavenged along with the seagulls and a few staff. And what do sociologists do? They group things into categories. So he mentally sorted what he was seeing from around 400 vehicles dumping loads every day. These materials coming into the landfill were mostly stuff he thought could be sold if processed correctly, which is why the categories are called market categories. What he did was he came up with 12 distinct groups of material that described everything in a typical landfill. He imagined that some material recovery business, maybe a composter, a paving and grading company, a soils company, would be able to collect, process, and sell each category by group. When you start to look at zero waste recovery, that was just absolutely significant. Now, there's a segue in Rick's interview when he tells about how the US arrived at using landfills to dump wasted resources. And I hadn't heard this before, and I found it really fascinating. So here's what Rick had to say. You have to understand that the civil engineers, the CBs, are the ones who developed garbage disposal for this country. I'll tell you how it happened. We really never had any real garbage laws because 95% of everything was recycled in the 1940s, mostly for the war effort, and even into the 1950s. Our tradition in America was to recycle everything at little local dumps and then burn whatever residual there was, which was usually dirty paper and other stuff like that. You'd burn your trash even in your home, in furnaces or the fireplace or in the backyard in a burning barrel. And that was America's technology back then. But cities started to grow and economic growth started happening all around the world. And now stuff was taken to the outside of town somewhere and set on fire. These were the open burning dumps and they became a nuisance. Typically, the only requirement was a fire permit, and then maybe the Public Works Department once a week would come and put some excavation dirt on it. Well, that all changed when the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act started to deal with it. But, oh, wait a minute, there's a backstory. When we went into World War II in the Pacific against the Japanese, the troops would set up camp. After they finished eating their rations, the tradition was they would set anything left over on fire in a dump. But they couldn't do that on those islands because they were at war and a fire would give away their position. So a guy named Jean Vincennes realized that because the Pacific War was fought in the tropics, the issue was really vectors and flies. So his solution was, okay, we dig a hole. The troops put their leftover stuff into this hole. Then you put the dirt back on top of it. And that's at least the idea of a sanitary landfill. After the war, Jean Vincennes brought his idea back to Fresno, California, the first place where I worked after leaving Long Beach State Recycling. Jean established the first sanitary landfill, and it was in Fresno County. Basically, he dug a hole in the ground and put dirt on top of it. At first, it was not seen as the comprehensive answer that it became later. When the engineers of America started to look at how to implement RCRA, which was the federal legislation first passed in 1976, that regulated landfills, among other issues, they were still fighting over many other technical solutions. My opinion is that most engineers saw waste to energy as the answer. They thought they could combust it, make energy, and the public would see burning garbage as a resource recovery, not wasting. Legions of people thought otherwise, so that led to passionate conflict that raged on for decades and in some ways is still with us. What the engineers didn't understand then, and only some understand today, was that the population of the planet was going to grow at such a rate that these resources were going to be limited. Even though wastes were technically renewable, they were limited. Therefore, these limited resources were going to be more valuable for making paper back into paper than for burning them for energy and then losing their resource value and then turning the ash, dust, and sludge residues into a long-term liability. Now, Rick was also at the center of starting several important recycling organizations as well. And as he tells it, what I recognized after all these years is that recycling is really a community activity. So it was easy to get into it and make it work. After 2 years, the Ecology Center at Long Beach State became a hotline for recycling information from all over Southern California. We put on a conference in the third year. We had 200 people show up at Long Beach State for the first Southern California Recycling Conference. And that's how NCRA got started. So the answer is, if you were an organizer and you were looking for something to do, which I was at that age, it was as easy as anything to start because the connections were already begun. As to what was involved in joining, it was the beginning of linking groups together. And that connecting became what I did when I wasn't out at the center working. In those days, we didn't have computers yet. We had telephones and letters and then faxes. And that's how we organized statewide conferences and forums. From that point, we started the California Resource Recovery Association. Early on, it was a network of recycling centers that had started in other places, just like it did at Long Beach State. 1974 was the year when the Southern California group filled out the papers and filed them with the Secretary of State to set up NCRA as a statewide nonprofit. Then we flew up to San Francisco. We Southerners met at the Ecology Center in Berkeley, with the recyclers from the north, and we created the first CRA board of directors, 3 representatives from the north and 3 from the south. Then I worked with Neil Seldman on organizing the National Recycling Coalition. It was the first recycling group to claim it represented recyclers from all over the USA. We held the first National Recycling Congress in Fresno in early 1980 on Earth Day, April 22nd. Meanwhile, within CRA, we were saying, look, we've got a California presence, and we already are drawing people from the whole USA, but we're also pulling in people from other countries. There's an international side to this. It's all about recycling and resources everywhere, and it's global. So somebody needs to take the lead about figuring out how to get that organized. And I said, I'll do it. I'll do it. I was not only happy to be a world traveler, I wanted to be a world traveler. I set myself up in 1992 for this role when I entered a call for papers and got accepted for an international conference in Geneva, Switzerland. My first international paper was on our MRF in San Diego. I met a bunch of people over there, and together we created the Zero Waste International Alliance. So organizing nonprofits is what I did in those years. All the organizations that I worked on are nonprofits. As I get older, I can take my political platform on the road, and our goal is now international zero waste. That's it.
Thank
You did a great job editing that, Dan.
Thanks.
As always, beautifully read. And we're going to ask some questions of Rick in a moment, but I wanted to also highlight, because we're talking about the archives, whose little known but important contribution to the future of the recycling archives, because the very first public performance of the recycling archives was the last CRA conference in the Palm Desert, where Susan and I were delegated to go generate some interest. And, Susan did stuff. Susan had poster boards, she had PowerPoints, she had audiovisual stuff. She had a funny little game, which, people like to play at trade shows. I didn't contribute anything, of course, except that when there was a technical problem, I would search through the hall to find someone who knew how to fix it. But the important contribution was Rick's, because we were at the prime table in the front of the hall. It was 119 degrees outside, and you would do anything to get some air conditioning, and the hall was air conditioned. So people would come in and they would see our table. So if they saw our table and they saw Susan and I, they would be polite about it and him and haw and then walk on. But every now and then Rick would stop by. And when Rick would stop by and sit down at the table, everybody in the hall came by, because Rick knows everybody. And even more importantly, people like him. So all of a sudden we had an audience for the recycling archives. And it may not make your top 10 list of things that you founded and done, Rick, but we appreciate it. And tonight's the night we recognize.
I love it.
Yeah.
So before I turn it over to the crowd, Rick, I get to ask a question. I'll just try to throw the big one out there, which is, of all the things you've done, looking back over these last 40 years or more, and besides just being friends with everybody on this, many of this, what do you think has been your most important accomplishment?
Well, I was telling Dan the other day is that when we did this interview, I was just winding up my work with the county. About a year later, they had a massive cutback on staff, and I got put on the list to be relieved. But the reason is they sold off the whole landfill operation for $300 million to Allied, and I ended up in wastewater, and it's okay. But since then, I started Richard Anthony Associates, and we've done like, I thought 30, 40 different zero waste plans, literally all over the world. And that's important. But the best thing I think was that one day coming back from a CRA conference, my daughter Laura was yelling at me, and she said, you say all this stuff, but what are we doing in San Diego? And I'm going, yeah. So we ended up organizing Zero Waste San Diego. We've been around for maybe 10, 15 years. We've done 9 symposiums. We've done, Laura said, over 300 fix-it clinics. we're becoming the go-to organization in San Diego for moving forward. And politically, we're working on climate plan and making sure zero waste in there. So, you know, I really like this internet, everything we've done. And it wasn't me, it was everybody else. I just happened to be there every time when we got these things started. But I think for me, the organization and development of Zero Waste San Diego and where we're going to go in the next 2 or 3 years is a really important highlight.
So what would you say to people that are in the younger part of this group?
Come on down.
What
We're
would you-
hiring. We're hiring like crazy. My God, Colby Sky told me the county is organizing, hiring 30 new employees this year because the state is now requiring organics to be separated from recycling and trash. And therefore, every city is now looking for, what do I do now? How do I organize a program? And not only that, I need managers to actually implement the program. County is looking for 5. I love it. Team San Diego have 5. We've just picked up a couple as needed jobs. It's a bulk contract and they tell us what we want to do, but I'm anticipating 3 or 4 additional subcontractors to help me get this work done. So I think it's a huge opportunity to get work and in a field that's going to become more and more important. Mayor Lindsay said back in the 70s that, well, in the future, recycling will be the mainstay of industry. And it is now. Most industry, I mean, any piece of steel that you get today has probably been recycled 5 or 6 times. You probably have some steel, if you get steel rod, it's probably been around. Some of that steel has been around for hundreds of years. And what it was, John Moore was telling me, there's another John Moore, the paper guy. He's been around, maybe it's more, maybe I forget his wrong, but the paper industry is now over 70% of the paper that is being generated is being collected and processed. So this is a growing field for managers, for data geeks. My God, finding out where things are coming from and tracking them, that's important. Online managers, and then just general working. Now, this is a whole new field that's going to grow really big. So what I know, and when you talk about recycling constituency, and what I was saying, maybe Dan could back me as a sociologist, but I think 15 or 20% of the people worldwide are fanatics. Maybe we're hoarders, or maybe they're just into doing things right or efficiently, but you automatically have that base that you can work for and move forward. And that's going to be the base that's going to change the world.
So if you're talking about California's new laws to recycle more organics, and we're going to talk on this show in a little bit about, processing organics to make something out of them, where's the business development opportunity here in California?
I told all my friends back in Fresno that were haulers to go buy land and be ready to have a composting facility. I mean, if you want to run down here in San Diego, there's a huge demand for processing organics. And so that's one place. That's a business opportunity for sure. The other business opportunity we see is hauling, working on edible foods, getting it from the generator to the pantry. This is another, a small business that's going to pick up and be very important. The other thing I think oh my God, plastic. So those of us who've been in the field know that we can sell plastic, 1s, 2s, 5s, even LDPE has a good market value, but steel companies, they have buyback centers, still have, paper companies have paper yards. I think a good business would be to set up a yard. And I think today with the pressure on the industry, somebody might get funded to do that, but basically a buyback center for separated recycling. We actually funded a guy when I was in the county, Tom Long, to set up a plastic recycling program. It was shut down by environmental health because it looked like litter to them. And when I looked at the yard, he says, "No, that's not litter. That's plastic. That's what he's doing." But so I think those are opportunities. There's a lot more. I could go on and on.
Where would you put those facilities? I would assume that San Diego land costs are pretty prohibitive to.
Yeah. we want to do an urban ore, and you're right, we couldn't find it in the center of the city, but I know in the unincorporated area, there are big box stores like Kmart's that went out of business that are empty and have big lots. And what we got to do is figure out how to finance that. I'm hoping maybe the state and feds will see reuse and repair as a good product to loan some money. But anyhow, I would do that. Most of these small people like, what was her name? She just talked to me from the NRC conference, and she is setting up a store here in San Diego that's going to sell bulk goods. Bring in your own containers, and you can buy dry goods and things like that. So, a lot of people are setting up businesses to provide reusable products for people. I think it's just the imagination just soars.
You need to actually understand the financial sector of recycling too, and to uncover the opportunities. You have to understand that over the period of the 40 years or so that Rick and I and others have been in this business, the cost of disposing of things by wasting it has skyrocketed. And so what you're working against is that you're basically, your competition has become unsustainable because it's too expensive. And if you can get paid for disposing of the same material by recycling it, and disposal is not, disposal is a word that applies to recycling. It's not something separate from recycling. It's what we do every day. We're disposing of things that people don't want in a better way than the wasters do. Right. If you can do that, and you can get paid some fraction even of what the wasters get in Berkeley, that's $126 a ton to dump as waste. If you can get even half of that, and we're getting $47.74 now per ton, you've got a financial engine that just won't quit. Right. And so you can afford to buy, because you're going to be around for 100 years as a material collection and conserving organization that's necessary. It's an essential business. Because you're going to be around all that time, you're a good risk. Yeah. You're a banker, or for any kind of finance people, because what they want to know is, when are you going to pay it back? And if you've got 20 years or 40 years to pay it back, you can buy land. We did, and we're this funky little reuse business, but we own three acres of West Berkeley, which is some of the most expensive land anywhere, and we bought it.
So there's your example. You're the business example. John, when you asked me my highlight, I didn't think about it, but let me just tell you, maybe it's a short little story. We were up in doing a tour, Eric Lombardi and Paul Conant and Jeff from Seattle with Rossano Ercolini, who's the head of the Italian zero waste movement. And we were in Milan and Florence, and we're up in Monte Carlo, and we're sitting there talking. I'm going, we need to do a dialogue here, international dialogue here in Italy. I'm thinking Rome. And he said, yeah, I think so. I said, okay, we're going to Rome. He said, no, we're going to Naples. So I'm going, no, Naples is the most corrupt city in Europe, and it's compacted, and they haven't collected garbage in 3 years. And he said, yeah, that's where we're going. During that same time, we were fashioning out the zero waste definition and getting peer review. So the idea was we would invite our zero waste network, it was about 30 of us, to come to Naples and meet with the public and run the definition through the public and get them to buy in on it, or at least tell us what was wrong with it. And that's what they did. There was about 500 Italians that were really pissed off in the room. They had headsets. They didn't buy us a cannoli or any coffee, but they stayed through the whole thing. And they heard the speeches of what's going on around the world. And we put the definition in front of them, and they talked and they talked. And they said, look, we're going to march on City Hall tomorrow. And I said, well, we're not marching on City Hall unless we work this definition out. And we did, and we got approval. Marched on City Hall, and there was maybe 500-600 people, and they made me stand in front. And I told Debbie, I try not to get arrested, but they took the front line and they took us into City Hall and sat us down. They brought the suits out, talked and told them what we're all about. And Tanya Levy, who most of you know, was there. And she said, well, you guys got to come to San Francisco. We have a lot of Italians there and we're doing zero waste. And anyhow, they let us go. The next morning, we met in the Gaia Hotel, believe it or not, and we finalized the definition and got everybody happy. And Paul and Zana and I went back up to Luca for me to take my plane out. And we were all it was just under the Obama administration, just after Obama got elected. And we're all in the top, the three of us, talking real loud in English about our successes and how happy we're all. And the next table, 8 Italians stood up and put their drinks out and said, yes, we can. And I have to tell you that was, that whole of it. Today, I'll tell you now that Naples is a zero waste city in Italy. God knows how they do it, but they're doing it. There was a, really kind of a, first day I got there, the newspaper got me and said, well, why are you here, Mr. Anthony? And I said, well, we want to change the way we handle resources in Naples. And so the headline for the paper is a group calls for revolution in Naples. Okay, well, that's how we started off.
Rick, are you still doing poetry?
Mostly what Gary calls work haikus. Short memos which just tell you what I feel. I haven't written any in a while, but yeah, it's still part of what I think.
So Rick, can you stay around for a little while? Because I told Ms. Rodriguez that we would start talking about fungi at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
And she's 2 hours ahead of us in time. So we're gonna pause talking to Rick for a moment, and we're gonna shift and talk about fungi or fungi, however you'd like to. Fungi, I guess, would be more the Italian way of saying it. So we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna start something a little unusual for our ZWAC show. We're gonna watch a video. And we're gonna watch a video because the person who is speaking at a TED Talk, Paul Stamets, really started the discussion about using fungi to remediate toxins and to build new products. And so I want to start by watching his 2008 TED Talk. It's being facilitated by Bonnie Betts, who is our social media director, because I couldn't possibly do this myself. So we're going to watch Mr. Stamets' TED Talk, and then we're going to talk to Ms. Rodriguez about whether it's lived up to the hype. So let's watch the video first. We'll come back, talk to Ms. Joanne Rodriguez, and then talk to Rick Anthony some more.
So
Bonnie?
John, are we going to watch it for 18 minutes?
I think we are.
Okay.
I couldn't find a good way to edit it down.
Well, you could just tell people click on the middle or start at a certain time and then end at a certain time.
Why don't we start it and see how it goes? We were a little concerned about the 18 minutes, but I couldn't figure out a way to shorten it. And its content is pretty good, if that's
Okay.
all right. So Bonnie, fire away.
Can you let me know if y'all can hear the sound okay?
Okay.
No sound. None at all.
Of a challenge, and saving the is probably a good one. We all know the Earth is inside.
So maybe this isn't going to work.
Still no sound?
No sound.
No sound, and it's kind of freezing.
Okay.
No, the sound's not working. Okay, well, maybe this isn't going to work. Why don't you take it off the screen and I'll just summarize it.
Hey, Bonnie, could you put the link to the YouTube video in the chat so we can watch it later?
Yeah, certainly.
So why don't you take it off the screen too? All right. Well, it's not the first time I've had a technical difficulty. So we'll cut to the chase. In 2008, Paul Stamets, who wrote the book Mycelium Running, spoke and said, oh, in the future, fungi are going to get rid of viruses. That would kind of help right now. It's going to pull carbon out of the air. That would kind of help right now. And it's going to break down cellulose. And if it can break down cellulose, it can break down plastic. We could use that a little bit right now. So from 2008 onward, personally, I hadn't really heard anything about what we were working on with mycoremediation or mushroom remediation. When I was on the Stop Waste Board, I asked the director to do something, and she did a project with a UC professor, and he wrote something, and she didn't like it very well, so we never heard about it. So I've searched the web and found Joanne Rodriguez, who is with a company called Mycocyle in Illinois, and I've asked her to join us tonight. And the start question is, have we come as far as Paul Stamets said we would in 2008?
I think in some arenas, yes. I think the fact that we're sitting here talking about my company and we've trained mushrooms to eat trash, I would say that yes, that's definitely a nod to what Paul Stamets foresaw. So yeah, I would say we're there.
But he was, when he gave the talk, we were already eating trash. We were eating oil spills with mushrooms. What are we doing better or differently now?
I think thinking outside of the box, I can very much commiserate with the story of Rick Anthony and how he came to recycling and saying that he had not a clue. I don't come from that industry. I come from the material manufacturing side. I come from the side that made the trash that went to landfill or incineration as the only means, as the only outlet. And then I also came to realize what fungi could do to break down heavy hydrocarbons. And so it was a business background that I had, a different perspective. And so I think that's, this conversation is very new in terms of thinking about treating industrial waste and not just environmental waste. And when I say just, it's not to diminish it, it's still a big deal, but we have overflowing landfills. I mean, we're running out of space, and I think it's time to try something maybe a little curious. And that's what we're up to these days.
So what would you like to try?
Well, originally it started where I came from, right? From asphalt-based products. I worked for a manufacturer. I was director of sustainable and strategic initiatives for them. And we worked for colleges and universities and healthcare systems, a lot of corporates, and even the federal government. And we couldn't get any of them to zero waste in the tear-off material. So I'd like to see us really chip away at the roofing products. If we just took asphalt shingles, for instance, and that is regularly measured and has been since about 2009, 2010, to be about 11 to 13 million tons of waste each year, maybe 2 million tons of that being captured. That is about to change, and I can come back to that. But that 11 to 12 million tons each year would fill Yankee Stadium 27 times each year. I mean, it's a huge volume. So I'd like to see us really go after this fourth largest waste stream, construction and demolition waste, because I think we can really start to move the needle. I know we can. Our test results show that we can have a dynamic effect on at least removing the toxins and creating viable opportunities for reuse.
So what do you use to remove toxins, and what kind of construction material?
We use mushrooms. We're using fungi. So a little mushroom 101, and you can say it either way, fungi or fungi, but we're using the root structure. The fungi is the entire name of it. The mushroom is the cap, and the mycelium's the root structure. So we're really using nature as it was intended, right? It's already been working environmentally without our help to break down heavy hydrocarbons. They're the only known remediators of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAH, which is a classification of chemicals, not necessarily added. Being in Northern California, I'm sure that you have seen with the wildfires, mobile remediation efforts in isolated spots to clean and regenerate the soil. We're doing a similar practice, but in a controlled environment to knock down the asphalt-based materials and even start to treat the phthalates, which are red list chemicals. They're endocrine disruptors, and we've had great success on that. So we would really like to start working on that construction and demolition waste more wholly, getting after it and removing more of those asphalt shingles from the streams, not only from manufacturing waste, which isn't accounted for in that 11 to 13 million tons a year, but in the tear off waste too.
Well, I gather it's not as simple as going out into the forest and digging up some fungi and then applying it to some phthalates. How do you do that? How do you find?
Well, I mean, you actually could. You can go out and see what's working in nature already, right? So you can do some RNA testing where we could go to a landfill and do some biome testing, see what's already growing on waste materials, and then develop treatments from there. But generally we're using within that classification of white rot mushrooms. They are the decomposers. They are very strong and they can match heavy lignin based materials. And so what we're able to do is expose the strains that we work with rather effectively to the waste products and create a generational strength. So each round that we test, we create a new and stronger depth of efficiency. Our goal is always one, to do no harm, right? We don't want to do worse than what we're doing, but to really limit the amount of input that has to happen. Like, we'd like to be as natural as possible in a contained environment. So we're not producing additional waste as a result. So yeah, we grow them in the lab and develop bulk inoculate. And right now we're developing bulk inoculate at our facility in Mexico. And we're scaling a 1 ton paid pilot there for a customer on SBR chrome rubber waste.
So without revealing trade secrets, now that you've got, let's say you've got a big pile of rubber or a big pile of asphalt shingles, and you want to apply one of your bulk inoculates that you've tested to process those materials, what do you do? What's the process look like?
Well, I mean, there are 3 thoughts in our business model. The original one was to partner with the waste management industry and mobilize on their footprint, right? So we're not really waste management, we're not really composting, we're kind of in this intersection there. And so it seems to make sense to kind of align with those in the industry already to house our process. So, it could be as easy as being in a pole barn. It's a little bit more advanced than some composting solutions, but not it doesn't have to be super intense. And so the second model, which is where we're leaning to, is just kind of to buy the property and start the compost thing, is to house the solution ourselves, kind of remove all barriers to entry, iterate through it as we scale, because we're building it as we're flying it, and be the owners of our destiny, right? And create a model where this could be replicated. And the third one would be to work on mobile remediation pods, where we can take the solution to where the waste is generated. And in some rural areas, that's very desirable. In other parts of the country, in the world, where they don't have waste management systems, that could be a desirable avenue. So yeah, the waste, when we bring it into the lab, it comes ground, or we grind it, we put it into controlled environment, we grow through it, and usually we see a pretty good growth within 7 days, like grown through. But if we're really trying to remediate it, we're looking at 2 to 4 weeks to have the toxins reduced, and then it's up to the client as to what they want to do, right? There's a byproduct that's left that has the potential for reuse. So like that rubber waste that we're treating down in Mexico, it will go to a global flooring manufacturer for advanced material testing. They want to create a new composite flooring product with the rubber and the mycelium network. So they'll test on that ton.
So you kind of use a vesselized process, kind of like anaerobic digestion a little bit?
Yeah, and it's an aerobic process. The fungi need, the mycelium needs to breathe, but it doesn't really need a lot more than that. And it's actually got us starting to think about digesters and fermentation practices, and starting to work in submerged fermentation practices so we can liquid apply en masse. And that could be a big game changer, I think, for the waste management industry. If we make this super simple, there's a thought that this is like, you need too much room to scale this and you can't control it. And that's not the truth. We do feel that once you start, bringing in this heavy duty machinery, these digesters, people are like, ooh, look at that, right? They must really know what they're doing, when it's really not that difficult. We can do it without those. We can do it in a solid state form.
So it sounds like what happens is somebody has a big pile of stuff that has some toxins in it. So they give it to you to process and you detoxify it. And then you hand them back the same material without the toxins, and then they can do something with it. Is that kind of?
Yeah, if they're so inclined. I mean, that's why I originally was, thinking in a model where we would be working directly with waste management agencies. I think, our low-hanging fruit is with government agencies. Quite frankly, they're the ones left with the burden of trying to figure out how to not have to pay money to have a recycling program or to get to zero waste. But I sit on the Construction and Demolition Recycling Association's end use committee, and there's operators across the country every day trying to figure out viable reuse markets for the materials they take into their MRFs and transfer stations, because it's, they're facing obsolescence. They'll be shut down, and then they'll be faced with the cost of now maintaining a shut down landfill, or now taking waste in but no outlet to get income back in. So that is certainly one avenue. The other is working directly with the manufacturers, John. So like in this instance with the rubber to flooring, that's an interdivisional relationship. And so the material would never go to waste, into the waste system. It would come directly to us in a joint owned facility where it would be processed, and then it would go right into the other divisions manufacturing.
So just throwing it out, it sounds like in theory, you could take an existing landfill and salt it with fungi and let it just eat its way down to the bottom.
It's like, yeah, rainbows and unicorns. I mean, there might be some environments where that could work. That's where we really look at like a liquid fermentation to create a liquid inoculant, because maybe we could do something like that, in a big dreamy world. But you do have to control it a little bit. The mycelium needs time. I mean, we can do some external manipulation to engineer it to speed up how the rate of growth, but it won't really detoxify it in much less than 7 days. And then you have to be really aware of what the climate conditions are. I mean, fungi like a really specific type of like all of us, they want it to be 68 to 72 with a decent relative humidity and be undisturbed. That would be me by the pool with a drink in my hand. So we can't really do that. What we can do though is look at mining landfills for high volume waste, like gypsum fines, C&D fines, where we could start to knock down hydrogen sulfide and maybe turn the tide on the regulations that are precluding those from being used as an ADC. And we might be able to change the nature of those materials with the mycelium and create a new ADC. And so that would lend a lot of relief to many landfillers. That's not necessarily the essence of zero waste because it's already there, but it certainly would be the essence of reuse, to try to put it into some type of beneficial application rather than just filling up landfills.
So when we talked, you told me that fungi are used for two things. You can use them as detoxifiers and you can use them as builders. And I gather
Mhm.
different fungi are useful for different things. What can fungi be used to build that we need building?
Yeah, I mean, so in California, you guys are kind of lucky because you're the epicenter of mycelium technology. MycoWorks is out there. They are creating the animal-free leather of the future with their fine mycelium brand, Reishi. So they've already been working with Hermes and other high-end designers. They're building a plant out there, biorefinery. You also have Paradise Packaging, and they are replacing plastics in packaging products through Ecovative, which is based out of upstate New York. So Ecovative's been a pioneer in using mycelium as an input with the whole goal to replace plastic and create completely biocompostable byproducts, primarily in packaging. And they did start in building composites. And when I worked for the company that I was with, I actually said, hey, we ought to look at buying them, right? This is a pretty cool avenue to consider. But, you know, roofing, much like waste management, is a little arcane, and they aren't quick on the take unless they're forced to be by regulation. So we can see it go into building products, acoustical tiles, fireproofing agents. Then you see the packaging, even consumer goods and toys, the sneakers. They're in Adidas, and you'll see a whole textile market come through where these are manipulated into different types of opportunities, like replacing silk. We're starting to see mycelium silk as well.
That sounds so cool. Why aren't more people doing it?
I think a little bit of that maybe mycologists aren't the best marketers. Like they're not, there are a lot of mycologists out there. Most of them are in university settings. The ones that are out there, like Paul Stamets, he is almost 100% into the supplement market and psilocybin. So he's not really been talking about this sector of it. I even think Ecovative has had, I mean, they've been around for almost 15 years and they haven't launched in the manner that I thought they would have, leaving a pretty big opening in the biocomposite space for hopefully us to take on. I think it takes maybe a different business mind to come at this solution. But I couldn't do it without mycologists. So it's not a knock on that. It's just, you don't see a lot of business in mycology. And so hopefully we can start to change that and get people to think about applications and get them out of the lab and even the hobbyists. And that's one of our big goals, is to create just a big incubator space that we can help some of these solutions get to market and out of our heads. And I know it sounds super crazy, right? That I've trained mushrooms to eat trash, but we're doing it, you know, and that's, you know, if I can have these conversations and inspire other people to think about things innovatively, then I've done my job.
So I was hoping we would have some biology students from UC on this Zoom, and I don't know whether or not we do, but what would you tell them as a possible career choice in mycology?
Oh, I would say, I mean, go after, especially the advanced materials side of things. Look at the different uses for chitin. Look at the different properties of these materials and as inputs. I mean, we've even changed some of our language and messaging around it to say, okay, these don't have to be the whole material, right? This could be just an additive that can lend higher performance to what you're already making, and it can come from your waste. It can be derived from your waste. So I would say for the botanists, the microbiologists, the chemists coming out of school, even the environmental scientists, really stay on this space, because the bio-based products side of the world is growing at 16% CAGR year over year. It's going to have phenomenal growth. It has to. We can't continue down the road that we've been going, and the European markets are already moving at a faster pace. And if you can really get into where you look at processes end to end and how they're circular and they afford, circular reuse, that is the key. We've almost all but bypassed recycling in the European markets.
Is there available money out there for this kind of industry growth?
I sure hope so. Yeah, I mean, we did raise on a Reg CF. We closed the round in April and we raised over $500,000. We did it by design. I mean, we take a lot of our cues from the fungi. They're network collaborators. They're very symbiotic, and we wanted the same thing. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the plastic pollution problem, and there should be, but there are other huge waste stream issues that we need to put a big eye on and start to innovate solutions to. So that was very good for us to bring 626 investors worldwide to the table so they could be brand ambassadors. Now we'll be launching a formal round of funding in the first quarter of 2022. And yeah, I think we will be going big on that. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of outreach from climate tech investors and biotech investors. So fingers crossed.
John, could I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm intrigued by the whole idea that you're putting forward here, having started at Urbanor at a landfill and walking around on a landfill. Back then, one of the things I did when I was trying to think ahead into the future was something like what you're talking about. I actually did a proposal to the National Science Foundation with an archaeologist named Carol Sutton. And the two of us put together a proposal to mine the Berkeley landfill, to dig up we would go out and survey a portion of it and then dig it up using a backhoe or something and compost everything. The basic goal being volume reduction. So we would take out all the concrete and asphalt that we saw coming in every day, because that would just be something that you could grind up and make into gravel. And we'd take out other things that would reduce the volume, but mostly we'd compost all the organics. And you're talking about something similar where you're using mycelia to do the same thing. But the basic goal then is to reclaim the permitted airspace that the landfill contains. That has a value that's in the hundreds of dollars, I mean, it's in the millions of dollars. Permitted airspace is really the intent, the whole thing about landfills. And that's why the permitted airspace is what's being used up. And when it's gone, it's basically gone because nobody wants a landfill anymore.
Absolutely.
All these landfills that are already there. So the permitted airspace market seems to me to be huge. And I would say that Urbanor might be interested in helping you with your financing.
That would be lovely. And you're absolutely right. I mean, when we talk points of pain, there are multiple points of pain, right? We have multiple different types of clients and markets, but for landfills specifically, there was a really good report that came out in 2020 from South Wake County, North Carolina, and they put dollars and cents to what it would mean to divert just 5% of their waste per year. If they could just achieve a 5% diversion rate, it would mean $6 to $7 million in direct savings to them. And so I'm like, well, we'll be your 5%, right? We don't need 100.
Sure.
But
I can see this being a gigantic moneymaker.
Yeah, well, and that's, if you imagine that if we could treat a ton of waste, and I'll use round numbers, for $100 a ton, the resale value of mycelium is akin to wood fiber, which is around $350 to $400 a ton. Mycelium holds some price points in the market too in some of the older studies. So it's a lucrative, there's lucrative potential, not to mention that in states like California, where you have carbon trading markets, once you start to look at diversion, 1 ton diverted equals almost 3 metric tons of CO2e avoided. So that's a real figure by the EPA that you can start to quantify.
So let's take a big chunk of, it's just a big square, a big cubic volume of some sort of asphalt shingles. And we grind it all up and put your inoculant on it and everything. And then 3 or 4 months later, what's the volume reduction like? Is that 2/3, 1/2?
It's about 20% reduction in the material, but it actually gets filled. It gets filled back up with the mycelium, but the mycelium is compostable, right? The mycelium will break down. So you do see some volume loss. That's what our next phase is measuring. I'm actually doing I'm a semi-finalist for Argonne National Labs Chain Reaction Innovation Center tomorrow. So that's one of the things that we'd like to partner with them to study, is how we reduce volume and actually break down the materials, things like vulcanized rubber, which traditionally you wouldn't be able to break down.
So
Interesting.
I am going to open this to questions, but I wanted to come back to the business side a little bit.
Yeah.
So, one of the great things about the zero waste business is if you're using, discarded material to make something, your cost of goods are pretty much close to zero.
Mhm.
So if I get excited and I want to build a facility that's going to use fungi to eat plastic litter, and I can get as big a pile of plastic litter as I could possibly imagine, what if any is the barrier to entry of market to me to get into that business? And what do I do with all the plastic that gets eaten by the fungi?
I mean, it's a good question, right? I mean, if we're looking at models where we would basically, that's what this funding round is looking at, is the model of the future, where essentially we could say, John, you're interested in a license. This is what you need to do: 10,000 square feet, this type of equipment. You need a leadership team and a business plan, and come to us with $800,000, or I'm just throwing numbers out, right? And then we're going to provide the inoculant for you, the treatment for you. So, but what happens to it, that would be up to you, right? You would own that. With our own facilities, we're building out that supply and demand, because it only works if there's a demand side. And so that's where I've been working very feverishly in my network of material manufacturers to say, this is how these components could be reused into new materials. Like plastic waste, I'm seeing it go into paving solutions, it's going into concrete, it's heating kilns for asphalt products. You have to be careful, though, that you're not trading one evil for another evil. And so we are cognizant.
You use the word license.
Yes.
I'm going to have to buy a license if I go into this business. So that tells me right off the bat that you've got something to license, which I suspect is a patent. And I know Paul Stamets' TED Talk, which we didn't get to see, talks about that he was going to be applying for patents for fungi, and I imagine that he did. So patents are kind of a barrier to entry to market. Am I going to be able, can I start from scratch and make my own fungi, or am I going to end up having to talk to somebody like you and get their fungi?
Gosh, I hope you'd be able to talk to somebody like us, since we've already figured it out, right? I mean, if I have been doing this for a few years, so if you want to take the years and ramp up, and I'm like, the more the merrier, because it's a $1 trillion industry. There's a lot of waste, so I'm not super worried. But yeah, what Paul Stamets actually did was super controversial. He was trying to patent species, like trying to patent nature.
Right.
And so that was a barrier to market, I think, for a lot of mycologists to try to innovate in different ways. They saw that as an impediment, and who wants to go on an exploratory search for patents that you could circumvent? I mean, he was doing whole classification. So we have a patent pending on a process. We have final patents pending in the US, Canada, and then EU stage is filed. So we're going for the process, not for the species.
But I'd still have to hire mycologists to build my fungi.
No, you would just hire us. We would do the fungi. You would administer, you would take in, you would do all the other fun stuff like codes and, license, your permitting, and you would handle that, but you would have a sliding market on what you could charge for it. And on the waste stream. So that would be the benefit to you. I mean, we can make 100% of zero, or we can fan our network out and start to make a percentage on growth that you do, right? So if you start pulling in a lot of tonnage, we get a percentage of every ton you treat, plus you're buying our fungal inoculate. It's a good deal for us. And I mean, we can work out contracts on the reuse, right? Hopefully we'll be in the position to buy that stuff off of operators if they don't want it, because we will have established new markets. Like, I mean, we're looking at cannabis waste to denature that and put that into packaging on our own. So we're working with some growers here in the state of Illinois. So there are a lot of opportunities around this. And if it's got mycelium in it, we want it.
Why did you start in Illinois? My wife wanted me to ask that question.
Oh, because I live here. Yeah, I live here.
There's nothing about in Illinois that makes it more conducive to fungi?
No, not really. I just have to say, I feel like though, we have a really strong entrepreneurial center here in 1871. I came through there because like 30 years in business doesn't mean you know how to do a startup. It's a foreign language still. I mean, after 3 years, but my first foray was doing an incubator at 1871. And then I went into the Clean Tech Open National Accelerator out of LA, out of Lacey. And I see this pool to the coast, but I'm like, why can't we have technology here? We can be a technology hub here. We've had a lot of agriculture here, and a lot of that is gone. If we can create workforce development opportunities, that's pretty key. And the Midwest is a hub for manufacturers. So, I mean, the majority of the manufacturers we've been working with are headquartered in Ohio. So we're talking to landfill operators there about mobilizing technology to scale some of those pilots.
Do you know Ken Dunn,
I don't.
Chicago?
I mean, I don't know. Chicago's a little big.
Well, he's into food recovery, and
Okay.
but he also, John, you think of curbside collection you probably think of it that it started in California. It really didn't. It started in Chicago, and Ken Dunn started it.
Well,
So, there's been a lot of innovation in Illinois. I know that because I lived there, and it's a very interesting place.
well, I know that if I was a college student, I would have gone into biology, not law school, if I'd heard this talk. But I know there's other people.
Not too late, Leon. It's not too late.
Right.
Well, there might, but I know there's other people on the call that would have questions. So I'm going to cede the spotlight for a moment. Portia, I know you had a question.
Well, thanks, John. Hi, Joanne. I'm the NCRA newsletter editor, and I'm very intrigued with your subject, but I hope that now or later you provide us some resources that we can look things up. For example, the study you just referenced in regards to 5% of the landfill waste representing millions of dollars of savings. I would love it if you would share that information with me or with Bonnie, and Bonnie could pass it to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a great study. And Portia, it's hard to find landfill airspace quantified, I think by design. That's like you have to, have a master's degree in mathematics or PhD to figure out the formulary, again, by design. And so when I came across South Wake County's report, I'm like, this is outstanding, because now we can go out and not just say, well, we're running out of room in landfills and it's going to cost a lot of money and the EPA isn't permitting unless you can replicate yourself 100%. Like, this is dollars and cents. So I'll absolutely share that to John to share with your group.
Grand.
Anybody else have questions? David's from UC.
Hi, Joanne. Thank you so much.
Hi.
I really appreciate your talk and everything you're doing. And yeah, I also have roots throughout the Midwest and end up in Chicago periodically as well. So glad to hear what you're up to. So yeah, a couple of questions. One is, can this be done, I guess, at the lab bench scale? Because I hear researchers in their labs who want to reduce their footprint, and everybody's trying to figure out like what they can do. And someone recently asked, oh, if it'd be great if I can get my bacteria to just eat my waste away.
Right.
Because I know someone who's working on some bugs for oil spills and things like that too. But anyway, I think, yeah, people on a small scale are interested also in what they can do, you know, without getting in trouble with all the compliance regs and things like that. But that was one question, is how small can you go with this? And then I guess my,
small.
okay.
Go ahead. I'll keep that one. I'll pin it. I'm old, but I'll remember.
Yeah, and then the other one too. I'm in touch with some cannabis people as well here in California, and working with them, I've been trying to audit and look at their waste streams, and it's crazy what they have to throw away. And I'm thinking, why can't we reuse either the plant material and all the organics, and also just allow.
You froze up, David.
The plastic from the containers that can be done for those industries, because they all want to be zero waste, but
yeah,
all the compliance elements and all the health packaging requirements make it hard. So
yeah, and I think that one's I'll take the second one first. Like I think that's the next huge burden on waste management. They're already seeing it as a burden in the state of Colorado. And they've probably have the most concrete regulations around how to handle cannabis waste. Illinois, I mean, when they legalized recreational marijuana here in January, it's just been like a rocket ship, right? So they have no ordinances around really how to handle that waste, other than it has to be handled on site. So the growers have to bring waste management to them, destroy it down to less than 3% THC. And then from there, it's like, it's like now a whole nother organic stream. So we see it akin to hemp, and let's create some packaging and let's add some structure to it with the mycelium. And it actually can be an input to our process to grow from. There's agricultural inputs to our process. So that's what we're exploring. And one of the things we're looking at is how can we then put it back into the cannabis industry, into some form of packaging for them, maybe to replace some of these plastics. And so that would be our hope, that maybe we can help get these growers to zero waste, because I know they want to get to zero waste, and it's very expensive to handle all that. Your first question, the labs getting to zero waste, can this happen at bench scale? Absolutely. We started messing with our gloves and face masks in the lab. So polypropylene fibers and polymers and latex, and the mycelium just took off to it. So we've been growing it into shapes and, into bricks. And so we should be getting our environmental quality tests back on that. And we were actually just awarded a Department of Energy grant through the Remade Institute in conjunction with Covanta and Miter Corporation and Braskem, who's the largest manufacturer of these waste streams, and the Mayo Clinic to handle medical waste. But yeah, we could do it small scale, and we've actually considered a consumer facing brand where we could do these at home remediation and maybe do it a monthly fulfillment, and you can handle maybe your food packaging waste at home. That would be upstream, right? We got to walk before we can run, but there's no shortage of good ideas. And I would say to your friends working in the lab that the more zero waste we can get in the labs, the better, because it is very hard. There's a lot of disposable happening there. So I appreciate the questions.
Ruth, you had a question?
Yes, thanks. I so much appreciate your work. My question is about, you were touching on it, pharmaceuticals and then illegal drug disposal. So here in California, we have 2 incinerators, and one of their big issues that they make known to folks who want to close them down is they are the place where people can appropriately dispose of their pharmaceutical materials. And of course, we think, no, it could be composted, microbes, mushrooms, something else other than incineration. And San Francisco in particular has been trying to research best management practices for pharmaceuticals, because they have, a requirement for take back to the pharmaceutical industry. And it's like, yeah, well, we got to do something better than incineration. That's ridiculous. So that was number one. And then number two was about illegal drugs. So the other thing that the incinerators do is when the Coast Guard gets like, I don't know, kilos of marijuana or cocaine or whatever they're getting, those kilos and kilos of drugs are taken to our California incinerators and incinerated. And they're like, well, we got to do this because, it's cocaine. So I want you to tell me that you can take care of that problem. Thank you.
Sounds like a party, Ruth. I would say that, we know mycologically fungi can break down pharmaceuticals. So that's one of the targets in almost every study that we've read, that there have been tests already done to do that. We haven't taken that up. I mean, we're just not permitted to do that. And, we've been highly focused on the rubber waste streams by design, because there's about 1 billion tons of SBR chrome rubber waste alone with this one client. And so if we could get that one right, we're doing pretty well. But I mean, I think it's something worth looking at. And I guess this was, I kind of finished short on David, but saying that with the cannabis waste, it'll be the same for the pharmaceutical waste and how these things are being handled. If you check the lobby at your state and federal level, it will be no surprise to see that you have a lot of the large incinerators like Covanta's of the world right there front and center. In fact, they weren't very happy to be on a team with me for this Department of Energy grant. But, I mean, sometimes you have to, make friends with weird bedfellows. And my thinking is that we just have to do better at legislating for more natural means of processing these waste streams. We have to be stronger in our lobby and our voice, so we could start to have influence, where maybe we don't have the big dollars, we do have the big voice. And so I'll pretty much talk to anybody anywhere about this, because the more that we're talking about it collectively, the more we could start to restructure how we can handle these waste streams and get it out of incineration, which quite frankly is so bad here, at least in the US, because we do the lowest level of burning, right? I mean, we do the lowest level of compliance. So yeah, I will work on that, Ruth, but I probably be in next year's conversation, but I'm happy to share the study about mycoremediation and the different target waste streams, pharmaceuticals being one of them.
Well, let me follow up that thought for a moment, because from my retail experience, I understand that sometimes, especially when you've got a new product, the first thing you have to do is convince the buying public that they want to buy the product.
Right.
For me, I enjoy reading books about mushrooms, The Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. But what I really like is we had a birch tree die in our yard, and watching the fungi taking it over, the different colors and shades and textures, and slowly but ever surely, eating it, makes me tell my wife, we really should have mushroom gardens in addition to flower gardens. How do you get out there and make this interesting to people? How do you
Well, it seems there's like a love-hate relationship with fungi. And I can speak to this as my 21-year-old daughter won't watch Fantastic Fungi. She's creeped out by it. My nephew is kind of weirded out by it, because we're kind of told that mold and fungus and we should shy away from that. And so that is something front and center for us in our marketing and education and outreach for 2022, is to really kind of personify the process and talk about the innocuous nature of what we're doing. And that's also one of the burdens to entry. Like one of the biggest questions I get from material manufacturers is like, is this going to grow? Like, is this going to grow on my roof? If I put it, is it going to grow in my insulation? And, I've had to get statements written by the scientists that no, it's low fired, and here are the 5 studies that support this process that are well known. And so I do think that's one of the things, John, that I'm focused on in this next year, is to really talk about the properties of it, because you have fungi that are really nasty too, right? I mean, so it's a fine line, and we're going to develop a plan to speak to the good side.
Yeah, you might not want penicillin in your insulation, but you might like it if you had a bacterial infection in your body, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, you get a whole lot of information now from people who are interested in the way trees communicate with each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about fungi. And it's all about how the fungi colonize the root area of trees, and they actually are messenger. They're like communications networks for trees, and the trees can actually communicate with each other about things like, oh, we're being invaded by something or other that's killing us.
Yeah.
And the mycelia somehow or other transfer that knowledge from one tree to another, and they can sometimes even bring in organisms that can wipe out invading other organisms that are bad for them. There's just a whole lot of real interesting literature developing around trees.
They call it the wood wide web.
Really?
Well, and John, I was going to say, even when Susan was reading the excerpt about how landfills got started during wartime, right? That's kind of going to be what happens with mushrooms and mycelium, because we are in wartime. I mean, we're well past the tipping point with climate change, and there's a recognition that's happening, but it's if you take the politics out of it, then money, and now money's going to be impacted if you don't start disclosing risk and mitigating them. The SEC has said, hey, Mr. Big Company, you have to start to list your climate risks and disclosures for your investors, so they can truly see, no more greenwashing. So once we start to monetize these impacts, we're really going to see it happen faster. But we are in a war to try to save the planet that we live on, and necessity is driving this, and will continue to drive this to scale.
Does anybody else have questions for Joanne? Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's 2 hours ahead. I hope that this has been a worthwhile outlet for you, because I think there's a lot of people here that want to get this word out, and I think that's why you're joined us. And I think it's been really interesting. Doug, you had a question?
Yeah, just curious. How effective is mycelium at remediating toxic heavy metals, if at all?
So it can sorb them into fruiting bodies. You can't get rid of the toxic heavy metals. So what we found, I mean, this is greenwashing, right? We can lower the amount per million per parts because it gets distributed through the mycelial network. And so, like, if you are measuring just in a square versus a whole ton, you could be compliant. Ideally, we'd like to get the process going to where we get to fruiting body, where there's actual mushroom cap, and that will uptake all of the heavy metals. And then those could be harvested. We're writing a grant around this in Warsaw, Poland right now, to go after as a means of rare earth mining using mycelium. So I mean, we already see it happen with trailings and similar to phytomining, but
you're really creating an ore.
Yeah.
You're creating an ore inside of mushroom fruiting bodies.
Yeah.
You're concentrating the metals, and then you can harvest the metals, as you say.
Absolutely.
Just like it's kind of like a mine. Well, that's the name urban ore for you right there.
Yeah.
We're in that.
Amazing.
Well, yeah, and that's heavy toxic heavy metals, I mean, we can, if that's the goal, we can design for that. This is not necessarily a one size fits all solution. There are different needs, right? But we do have a solution for asphalt. We have a solution for rubber. We have a solution we're developing for the polypropylene. And so, I mean, we'll have some shovel ready solutions, but then there's some customizable approaches that we can look at. So, and I just appreciate you guys allowing me to discuss this with John. I mean, you all are doing great work. I hope to be able to get out that way, you know, when this pandemic will settle down, if it will settle down. But I think that we have to continue to press. If there's anything that I referenced that you would like to see, I'm happy to share the studies. I've got a pretty vast research library. We didn't get as much done in 2020 as we had hoped, so that was a good time to research. So I'm happy to share that. And my email, I can share it in the chat if you want to contact me directly.
That would be great.
And you guys, everybody that's on this still, keep in mind right now that you're talking to somebody from Illinois. This is a flyover part of the country for us people who live on the West Coast. I was born in Wisconsin. I love the Midwest personally, and I like Illinois very, very much. And I think that we undersell it a whole lot. And I thank you very much, Joanne, for being on this call and for sharing your knowledge and your insights and your vision.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. And John, thank you, all of you. It's been a pleasure.
So we're nearing the end of our meeting for tonight. I asked Rick to stay on, so if anybody wanted to talk to him about his career, now would be the good time to do it.
Have a good night.
I'd like to hear what Rick says about this.
I'd like to know what Rick says about mushrooms in general.
Yeah.
I love mushrooms. I do. All over the world, I look for mushroom soup or mushroom risotto or whatever. So, you know, if they come up with a method to cause a way to get rid of toxics in organics, I think I'm all favor. Make it happen. Absolutely.
Should we start a mushroom plant in San Diego?
Somebody should. I'm overwhelmed right now with what I do, but I would encourage. We've got the largest amount of small farms in the state here in the county. Why not? We've got a good climate.
And you've got a pretty robust community association for composting, as I remember.
Well, we have small landfills that are composting. Most of what Edco just built a big digester, so that's there. And Mary Matava has a nice little landfill up in Oceanside, but I mean a composting facility. But and Allied's starting to bring one because the demand in California is that you better handle those organics. But I think there's a huge. Well, I tell you what we're doing different here is that we recognize if we were going to get this happening, we have to change the rules and allow local farms to be able to take organic materials. We convinced them in Hawaii when we talked about you'll let them sow their cash crop, but if they were growing if they're composting on the side, wouldn't that be okay? Could they bring in organics to do that? Oh, sure. Okay, fine. Well, if they had too much, couldn't they sell it? And they looked at us and they said, well, as long as it wasn't bigger than the plantation. Well, what we're doing now is we're working with the planning department to open up farms for taking organics for composting. And we think with these small farms, there's going to be a lot of demand for it. That's why I say that I think there's a career in hauling organics places. To tell you the truth, It's not just a composting facility or the anaerobic digester, which is really the last step. I think getting it on a farm.
Wait a minute.
Sally Brown said, I don't know if it was Sally Brown in her speech at the U.S. conference, Zero Waste Conference, talked about the overview of the composting. And she said in Washington now, the pot growers are giving specifications to the composters for the kind of material they want. Yeah, in San Diego, actually, that use our opportunity to tell the truth.
So Rick, Ruth asked a question, but before she asked that, you say that there's opportunity in hauling organics in Southern California, but people tell me that the waste haulers are trying to shut all that down, shut down any competition for hauling organics. Is that not true?
Maybe other parts of the state, I'm not positive
Southern
that down here in San Diego, the haulers are not contesting anybody who wants to start a small business. In fact, the city and county are now permitting small haulers to do that kind of work.
Well, that's good. Ruth, you had a question?
I was so impressed with Susan's reading of Rick's interview, and I really felt like Rick, your addendum to the interview was amazing, and I feel like you really need to get that documented, because I do think that Zero Waste San Diego, the phenomenon of Zero Waste San Diego really has to be included in the archive, because I don't know if you all know this, but if anybody tries to start a zero waste business in California, or a zero waste nonprofit, they have to ask permission from Zero Waste San Diego, because they're really the first zero waste organization in California. So that's a pretty big deal. And I think that that legacy, and particularly the work with the Fix-It clinics and the symposium and the and all that you guys are doing, you really need to make sure that that gets documented, because I think we know, even though you have a worldwide influence, Rick, and you go all over the world promoting zero waste, I think we know that zero waste is really community based, and Zero Waste San Diego is a really good example of that. So I hope that you would schedule a follow-up interview to addendum, not to make any more work for Susan, but I think it's really important for the document.
I'd like to talk about the last 25 years, and part of it would be my travels with Ruth Abbey. We've gone to about 6 or 7 different countries for zero waste dialogues: Brazil, Canada, Philippines, Italy, up to Davos, Switzerland, to make presentations. Having good people that work with you, like Ruth and Zero Waste USA, makes doing this stuff really easy, to tell you the truth. My most exciting, now we're affiliating Zero Waste for Zero Waste International Alliance, and we've got Canada and New Zealand and Uruguay and Argentina and Costa Rica and Italy and Canada and Brazil, all part of now the team. And we've come up with a form on our website if you want to affiliate. Usually a national affiliate will be because they want to certify zero waste businesses. An organizational affiliate like Zero Waste San Diego basically buys into the definition and tries to implement the declaration. So that's kind of where we're heading. I think it's huge.
Well, Rick, thanks you for joining us tonight. Thank you for all of what you've done. Thank you for being my friend. And I hope you get another 40 or 50 years to do all these things.
Well, I was going to say the latest request was Israel, and they want to affiliate. I was telling Ruth, time for another road trip. You want to go to Israel with us? Anybody?
Sign me up.
You have to pay your own way, unfortunately. Right, Ruth.
Anything else anybody wants to talk about tonight before we adjourn?
Good night, all.
Good night.
Thank you so much. I love this. And let me know anytime you guys want to work on these mycelium projects together or whatever. We can get you some asphalt from UC Berkeley, or, combine forces.
Great. Thanks for joining us, David. We want UC involved. We want connections. We want to have mycelium grow at UC.
Yeah, there you go.
I think we can do it, and I definitely want to get involved. So anytime.
Okay.
All right. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. I think we're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.